Thank you. Each year at the Ethical Society, we organize our programs around a theme. Our theme this year is Building an Ethical Future, and in January, we are exploring the future of money. And today, we will have our interim ministry team director, Amy Miller, present to us on Money Talks, a frank conversation. Please welcome Amy to the podium.
I brought my water bottle up. I know it's against the rules, but Nancy said that I can have a water bottle because I'm speaking. But I brought it up here because I have a 6-year-old. We have endless colds. We test for COVID all the time. And so I'm going to try not to cough into the microphone. I think everything's okay, but you never know. And I wasn't going to cry today. And then they play this song, which frequently makes me cry, and I was holding it together, and then I look at Crystal, and so I had mirror neuron crying. Anyway, hi, and welcome. I'm happy to see everyone. I'm going to try to speak a little more slowly and into the microphone. This is feedback that you gave me last time. So like Lance said, I am here to talk about money. I had a really hard time writing this because I'm actually pretty bad with money for someone who's owned a business for 10 years, and I'm not particularly interested in money. And I think it causes a lot more problems than it solves a lot of times, but that's actually the whole point. Our attitudes about money frame so much of how we move through the world. Fun fact, the number one thing people fight about in marriage is money. The other things being sex and communication, in case you wondered. Because what often happens is this: when you pair up two people who have fundamentally different attitudes in saving and spending and values around money, you create a consistent friction that is challenging to resolve. So a lot of times I would get clients who come in for therapy specifically because they fight about money all the time. But money's a tough one for a lot of people, though, and not just in marriages. For some, it drives everything, and for others, it's merely a nuisance that has to be dealt with. When you have enough, it can be no big deal, but when you don't have it, it's a constant source of anxiety that never relents. Where we happen to land on a socioeconomic spectrum can predetermine the probability that we will be able to access peace and freedom. The freedom from worrying about how to pay the bills is an amazing privilege that, sadly, many, many humans do not have. But so many people in the world do not share our values and do not see other people's well-being as intrinsically tied to their own, and I think that's the fundamental disconnect. When we understand that we are all part of the human family, we're better able to consider and care about human suffering beyond the abstraction that it can become when we're comfortable, and we don't have to see it if we don't want to. Many people in this world don't see how money doesn't really buy anything. As I sang last week, you can't buy love. But it doesn't buy anything but ease. It makes your life easier. It doesn't mean anything about a person. But sadly, depending on our early messaging, money can start to become conflated in our minds with our value as a human being. It can create confusion when we observe early on the disparities between folks who have a lot, way more than they need, and those who don't have enough. For some people, the experience of a childhood marked with struggle can make having money the ultimate goal in life, trumping all other goals. It can elevate money to a status beyond what it actually should be, which is a tool that makes life easier. Conversely, I've known people who have always had plenty, were always surrounded by people who always had plenty, and therefore formed a belief that what they had must correlate somehow with what they deserve. Socioeconomic privilege is one of those tricky things to talk about because I never want to suggest that having or desiring money is inherently bad, or that growing up wealthy makes you a bad person. That's not true. Coming from money, as they say, just makes life easier. If one is so inclined, just makes it easier if one is so inclined to ignore the mechanics of how and why some people have more and some people have far less, even when by all measures everyone is deserving and everyone is working hard. The pressures on either end of this spectrum can result in money wounds that can show up in myriad ways. When you think about your own experiences with having or not having money, you may uncover wounding that you were unaware of. You may not even be aware of how your relationship to money can impact other areas of your life. Some of you mentioned these things in your survey responses, which thank you very much for those. You guys have been very attentive to the surveys, which I appreciate, which tells me you're all reading your emails. I know the younger generations love to tease so-called boomers, but the thing I've observed about boomers, possibly more than any other generation, is they deeply desire security, and they worry about not having enough. They prioritize commitment and hard work, in part because those seem like logical ways to achieve the security they need to feel safe. They're most likely to stay in the same job their whole life and may not always understand or support the younger generation's commitment to a life of diversity, varied experience, or a commitment to being happy at work versus just working hard. When I think about this from a compassionately curious perspective, I think about how many boomers are the children of people who lived through the Great Depression, which by all accounts was an incredibly scary and stressful time. Some of you in this room were children during the Depression and likely have core memories formed during times of deep economic uncertainty. If your parents or caregivers experienced trauma around lack and hunger and fear, it is nearly impossible that none of that would show up in their parenting. It seems reasonable that it might impact their saving and spending habits, their willingness to take risks, and even their anxiety in general, and in turn impact yours. So when boomers express disapproval or dismay when the younger generations are less concerned about retirement savings or prefer to rent instead of buy, or quit their job every 3 years to do something new and exciting, I can see that underlying attitude as more of a projection of fear than judgment. They just can't believe that we, would be so willing to take risks with our futures. So I want to remind us to have patience with each other and offer grace, because none of us are created in a vacuum. We are all the result of our lineages, even as we are responding to different cultural and generational mores. Nonetheless, our stories are our parents' stories and their parents' stories, and so on. I used to know someone who had grown up quite poor and had been bullied a great deal as a kid for that. At some point in adulthood, he had had some success in business and he made a lot of money. The feeling of having money after so long of not having enough created in him an internal pressure that he could never shake. A drive to earn more, to do more, to have more, buy more, and in doing so, show the world, once and for all, that he is worthy because he has money. It always made me so sad to see this because there was no convincing him that he was enough just by virtue of being himself. His core fear was that if he wasn't rich, no one would want to be around him. He felt like he had to pay for everything, have the best of everything, and constantly flex his wealth. It distracted him from the more important investments in his life, being a good partner, a good parent, a good friend, being kind, developing himself. The only thing that mattered was making more money, so that insecurity about his intrinsic value could have no opportunity to root back in. He could not see the spiritual price he paid for the money he earned. This is a common phenomenon, and it shows up to varying degrees in men, specifically throughout modern history. Not that women don't also feel pressure to earn money or can't be the breadwinners in their families, but I do think men have been socialized in a particular way that we have not. To be honest, I only know that this is true because I was a therapist for a very long time, what feels like a very long time, and had many male clients over the years. I've sat with many a man while he cried and finally acknowledged all the pressure and fear he feels. I'm throwing this in here in case there's someone in this room today who needs to hear it. It certainly isn't true for everyone, but through conscious and unconscious social mechanisms, most American men have been consistently taught to believe that they must produce and earn money in order to be worthy as men. Patriarchy and capitalism have harmed all of us in this way, whether you've deeply internalized messaging yourself or not. The set of stressors unique to men can manifest in a variety of ways. Fun fact, the classic signs of depression are often missing in men. We think of depression as looking like tearfulness, can't get out of bed, seeming sad, gaining or losing weight, but these are outward signs. We often miss the inward signs of depression that a man is more likely to experience. So a man might be deeply depressed, unable to experience joy, not sleeping well, and we just don't see it. Or if the man does express negative feelings outward, it looks like anger, so we still miss it because anger is within the range of expected or accepted male behavior. Often, when pressed, instead of saying, "I feel depressed," he might instead say he feels crippled with a sense of responsibility, or a massive feeling of failure, or "I feel like I can't do anything right," especially when he's lost a job with some prestige, or when he moves out of a role that he felt gave him power, respect, and often money. Losing the ability to earn money is hard for anyone, everyone. But men of a certain age can experience it as a true devastation and loss of identity. But men are also broadly socialized not to talk about their feelings, so again, it gets missed or it goes unaddressed. Very often, however, the negative emotions of men are related to money and the perception of not having or not having power. As a culture, we don't seem to be comfortable talking about feelings or money. But not talking about money means that a lot of us are really uncomfortable when we inevitably have to talk about money. This can translate into not feeling confident to negotiate salaries or ask for raises, or discomfort in raising rates for services you provide. The lack of transparency when it comes to salary and the hush-hush around how much you get paid has also allowed for certain demographics to be secretly, and not so secretly, paid more than their counterparts. Hold, please. I just need a drink. Last week, the New York Times published an article detailing how the reporters asked over 400 people in New York City how much money they made. Only a small fraction of the people they approached were willing to talk about it. Most of those people ended up fretting out loud whether it was appropriate to talk about. One man started out sharing his salary, but in the process of discussing it, became so upset that he doesn't earn more, he retracted his statement. From the article. In November, a law went into effect that requires New York City companies with at least 4 employees to disclose a salary range for any job listing. Similar laws have recently passed in California, Colorado, and Washington state, with the aim, according to their backers, of addressing pay gaps that largely hurt women and people of color. In 2021, the median household income in New York City was $70,663, roughly the same as the rest of the country. But across the United States, women earned 83% of what men did that year, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And Black and Hispanic women earned far less than their counterparts in other racial and ethnic groups. Undervalued professions, typically associated with women, are still consistently underpaid, like teaching and social work, even though everybody knows that teachers literally make the world possible. Whereas other folks in other fields make seemingly unlimited amounts. Example, when I took my first job as a social worker in a nonprofit, I was making $32,000 a year. I thought that's just how it was. It wasn't until I struggled at that pay rate for a couple of years that I realized it was actually not fair, that I worked so hard and barely made enough to pay my bills. I also went to WashU for grad school, so I was paying off some very significant student loans. At the time, I didn't have a kid, so it wasn't as dire as it would otherwise have been. I don't blame the organization, and I loved my job, but it wasn't fair to work so hard and not be compensated for it. I felt angry and undervalued. But I always thought it was bad to be motivated by money, especially when so many people I saw every day as a social worker, they didn't have enough to meet their basic needs. So I just sort of accepted that struggle was part of being a good person. If I desired money, that meant I was selfish or greedy and not a good person. I don't think this is true, and I'm not sure I was even conscious of it at the time, but it definitely underpinned my values, my attitudes and behaviors. Maybe some of you have worried about this too and wondered how to balance a desire for money and ease and security with a desire to be a good person. When I started to make a little more money, one way I balanced things out internally to feel good about it was to give away money. Each time Giving Tuesday rolls around, For example, I send my $25 or $50 or whatever I can spare to some favorite nonprofits, often Arch City Defenders, Planned Parenthood, Action St. Louis, various pet rescue organizations. I am a sucker for a sad cat story. If a friend shares a GoFundMe, I'll send $10 or $20. A dear friend is running for alderperson in the city. I don't even live in the city, but I donated to her campaign. This is how I stay engaged in generosity, because while I need money to live, it doesn't really mean anything to me. If I have it, I'll probably spend it. Don't tell my husband. Whether to save a dog from euthanasia or taking my kid out to a fancy brunch. So I don't have the answers. I just know that generosity is a value that we're trying to instill in our daughter. Speaking of fancy brunch, one way we do that is to teach her how to tip appropriately. Zoe and I started going to coffee shops together when she was a baby. I was always the morning parent. My husband is a night parent, so he would get up with her in the night, which was amazing. And I would get up with her in the morning, and he could sleep, and then he stayed home with her. It was a wonderful system. But in the morning, I would be bored. Like, babies are kind of boring. I mean, they're sweet. Sorry, that's maybe a scandalous thing to say, but babies, they just don't really do anything. So I would take her to coffee shops with me. So we would people watch. I would stare at her. She was asleep most of the time. But what it did for us was that I lost my place, so I'll just talk. She got used to that. And so the outcome of that is that now she's 6 years old, and she knows that we bus our own tables in a coffee shop. We're kind and appreciative to service staff, and we say thank you with money. That's how I taught her about tipping. We say thank you with money, so go put this money in the tip jar and say thank you. So since she was about 3, I would let her use my debit card to pay for our food and hold her up, and she would touch the screen for the 20 or 25% tip or whatever and scribble my name. It was a thrill for her. Her signature looked approximately the same as mine. I just want her to know that being generous is part of our responsibility as human beings, but also that we give according to what we have. When she's deciding what she wants to do for a career, I want her to be more prepared than I was. I do not want her to struggle. The struggling was the worst part for me. In the midst of doing good work but not making money for it, I deeply desired to be free of struggle. I hated that itchy feeling of lack. I envied folks who could just do whatever they wanted and never think about whether there was money to pay for things, because there just always was. I got a bit of a chip on my shoulder about wealth, if I'm being honest. I'm still working on that. I moved into private practice in therapy in the hopes that my money issues would magically disappear. They didn't. Things definitely got better, but my attitudes about money lingered and got in my way. Like, I didn't want to raise my rates, even after several years, because I was afraid I would price out people who needed me. I always had a sliding scale that was available to anyone who asked. I didn't ask for their tax information. In fact, if they offered it, I said, I literally don't care. If you need a sliding scale, I believe you. And I only got screwed over twice, so in all the years. So people are mostly good. But I still felt bad raising my standard rate. I only raised it twice in the first 8 years I was in private practice. Thinking more about where our attitudes about money come from, though, it helps to consider family of origin. Many of you mentioned your varied upbringings in the survey this week. I was raised in a small working class industrial town in Illinois and grew up pretty solidly middle class. My parents are both retired now, but growing up, my mom was an elementary school teacher, and my dad an administrator, both in the public school district in our town. Side note, it was both a blessing and a curse that my father's office was in my high school, and to be widely known in the community as Mr. Miller's daughter. It made getting high on my lunch break a little bit trickier, but when I was late to class and I needed to pass, it was a great time to need to talk to my dad. If he's watching this, I hope he doesn't feel manipulated, but I was 16. He probably knows. My parents, both the first in their own families to finish college and both now holding advanced degrees, set an expectation early on that my siblings and I would go to college. I'm the middle child, to no one's surprise. So I went to college for English, which in retrospect, I'm not really sure what I intended to do with that. I moved to New York City after college and ran out of money within 6 months, moved back, and started grad school for social work. At no point in my meandering career that followed was I ever focused on making money, much less on saving money or investing money. I just wanted to do good things and be happy and free. I never learned about budgets or credit scores or how interest rates worked. I think it's probably true that many of us did not receive the most basic financial literacy, certainly not at school. If you were one of the ones who did, please don't be judgmental of those of us who did not. Because it wasn't even on my radar, because you can't know what you don't know. I guess because my experience of growing up was that we had enough, but not too much, and because people didn't really talk about money, I just didn't know anything. I didn't know how much my parents made, whether and how much they're saving, or what struggles they had. I knew I couldn't have whatever I wanted, but I didn't go without anything I needed. It seemed fine. I think it's notable that I didn't know any rich people, so I didn't have any upward comparison. We were doing better than many, if not most, of the people in our town, so everything was fine. Middle class was the expectation, if not the goal. Fast forward, though, and I'm a fully grown future version of Amy, with deep regrets about not saving more money, and I have a child now, and I have to send her to school. Now what? Now it matters. Now I need to know what money means. Now I have to care how much I make and where I live and what property taxes are. Now I have to care about things like school districts. Because in a place like St. Louis, where you go to school tells people a lot of information, including your whole presumed socioeconomic background. I had no idea about this, having not grown up here, but I have seen firsthand the subtle attitude shift that happens when people find out that my Black husband went to Burroughs for high school. And the shift the other way when people found out that I went to some random small-town public high school. It's a thing. So imagine my surprise when my husband suggested we check out community school down the road in Ladue. A lot of my friends are very surprised by this whole thing. I was convinced we couldn't afford it, but more than that, I was convinced we didn't belong there because we weren't rich. I'm a self-employed mental health therapist at the time, and he's a public school counselor. However, my husband went to community school and then went on to Burroughs, and he had no qualms about either aspect. He knew they had financial aid available, and overall, he had a positive experience there. So I agreed to tour the school, despite my reservations. I wasn't very kind about it. I was like, I don't want to go to school in Ladue. I know we are in Ladue right now, but sorry. I said I was working on it. But I was amazed and enamored immediately. I fell in love with the faculty and staff, the grounds, the amazing opportunities I could see an education like that providing. I'm pretty sure that during the school tour, I said several times out loud, I want to go to school here. Like if I could go back in a time machine and go to school, I would go to school there. They have a wood shop. It's amazing. So when the school welcomed us, and they worked with us, and they made it affordable for us, I will say the financial aid application kind of hurts my feelings every year, because they ask us a lot of questions, like, please explain why this number is larger than this number. Because we don't make enough money? That's the best I can come up with. But it is what it is. And I'm endlessly grateful that my child gets to go to school there. So I pull up every day in my Hyundai, wedging it along the drop-off line among BMWs and Teslas and Range Rovers. And I drop my middle-class child off at this fancy school, and I remind myself every day that we have just as much right to be there as everyone else. Meanwhile, she's so happy she literally runs into school every day. Sometimes she forgets to say bye to me. This is her 3rd year, and she's loved, and she's cared for, and she's seen and nurtured. My own attitudes about money almost cost my child this amazing education. My own limiting beliefs around what I deserved and where I belong would have instructed my pride not even bother applying to the fancy school. It was my own stuff that caused the problems. And to be honest, and to bring it back to our mission with the Pledge campaign, it was my own stuff that kept me from visiting the Ethical Society again after I spoke here a few years ago. I'm not a joiner, and I don't think of myself as a high intellect person. I'm quite brilliant in my own way, of course. But, for example, I did not find the talk last Sunday very easy to understand. And there were times when that might have made me feel bad. But now that I've been here, I know that there's something here for everyone. I know that not understanding something right away doesn't mean I don't belong here. In fact, it means I'm in the right place exactly, as we're all here to learn and grow together. And I can experience the high intellect and the new ideas as exciting opportunities, not as proof I don't belong. I know that if I look for proof that I don't belong, I will always find it. You guys know Brene Brown? Yeah? If you don't, you should look her up. She's amazing. But she's said and written 1,000 quotable things, but this one really resonated for today from her book, Braving the Wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Joining and supporting the Ethical Society is not like paying to belong to a country club, where you are not welcome if you don't pay some often exorbitant amount, or where you have to dress a certain way, or look a certain way, or belong to a certain social class. You already belong here by virtue of being a human being worthy of belonging. You don't have to do anything. We welcome and accept you as you are. I know this because I have been welcomed and accepted as I am. I want to differentiate so that we're all clear on what we are agreeing to and joining and pledging. I know this is the pledge campaign, but I'm certain there are folks in this room who are not members and have been thinking about what it might mean or not. To join the Ethical Society means you have intentionally decided to be part of a community and take responsibility for its well-being. You've agreed to weather the storms together and be part of solutions to problems that arise. I've been here not even a month yet, believe it or not, but I've already seen the incredible commitment our membership coordinator, Laura, has to all of you in making the joining process clear, smooth, and comfortable. But when I first heard about it, specifically the part requiring a financial commitment, I kind of bristled because it seemed too similar to the church tradition of requiring some percentage of income in tithing, which didn't always have transparency and always seemed a weird compulsory, prove you really love God by giving, even if you don't have it thing. I'm sure some of you had the same reaction. For fun, I did a Google search, why do churches require tithing? And got a lot of contradictory information from the Old and New Testaments, and even a whole thing about how when you're trying to get out of debt, you should still give to your church because God will bless you if you do. But is God going to pay my late fees, though? I say all that to say this is not any of that. So if you have bad feelings about any of that, because I know there's a lot of people with religious trauma in this community, or people who visit here because regular church or whatever religious tradition you grew up in doesn't feel good to you anymore, just want to say that. I can assure you that your generosity is completely up to you and what you have and want to give. When you pledge money to the Ethical Society, it is not because some external force will bless or curse you accordingly. It is a symbolic but also material gesture of love to the community. You are making a commitment, a pledge, to take care of the buildings, the staff, the programs, and the grounds. You're taking responsibility for the electrical panels that we need to replace, and stuff like the HVAC units, hot water heaters, bathrooms, and supplies. You're taking responsibility for the musicians and speakers that we bring in to make platform interesting and inspiring. We use the pledges that come in to plan for what comes next. How much we raise is how we know what we can do in the next year. And we have some big ideas. I told you I'm kind of an ideas guy. The pledge drive informs our budget for the next year. And these budgets are no joke. You should know that we should also know that we spend responsibly. The Finance Committee works really hard and is committed to protecting the future of the Ethical Society. If we want to grow, we have to have money. But I also want to acknowledge that it's been a hard few years. Everything is more expensive now, for you and for us. Eggs are like $7 a carton. Like what? And things that used to cost a little bit now cost a lot more, and in most cases, people aren't making more money. Organizations need even more money than before to do the same stuff, simply because everything costs more. It's a tough spot. So if you're pressed financially and can't give as much as you'd like, we do understand that. You can also pledge your time. We have tons of volunteer opportunities around here, and more are added all the time. Only you know how much you can afford to give or how much you want to give. Just rest assured that whatever you pledge this year, it is an investment into our shared future, which will be what we make of it. This community is one big DIY project with lots of room for all of us to contribute in the ways that are right for us. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being you.
Thank you for trusting in this community and sharing from such deep introspection in today's platform.